In 2003, a small hospital was constructed on the edge of an ancient, sprawling forest. Far from the nearest town, it was isolated in a remote area that few ever visited. Locals spoke in hushed tones of the place, warning that the forest was cursed, and the hospital seemed to attract strange occurrences. Over time, the hospital became a symbol of mystery and fear, though no one dared to speak openly about the events inside. Ethan, a 35-year-old man suffering from unexplained mental health issues, arrived seeking answers. From the moment he stepped inside, he felt an overwhelming sense of dread. The air was thick, as if it carried a weight of something unseen. The forest, visible through the few windows, seemed unnaturally quiet, as if nature itself was holding its breath. Inside, the building was silent, its corridors lit by flickering fluorescent lights. The staff were polite but distant, and their eyes lingered on him a little too long. Something felt off, but he couldn't place it. As days passed, Ethan noticed peculiar events, doors opening on their own, lights flickering, and the constant feeling of being watched. Patients in neighboring rooms whispered about strange occurrences, about hearing whispers at night or feeling an invisible presence. Some spoke of vivid nightmares, dreams of an endless, misty forest where something unseen seemed to be watching them. One night, after hearing strange noises echoing through the halls, Ethan decided to investigate. He ventured to the basement, where old records were stored. As he sifted through dusty files, he discovered something chilling. Records of patients who had mysteriously disappeared, their rooms undisturbed, marked unaccounted for. A sealed folder at the back of the room caught his eye. It was brittle, old, and marked with a symbol he recognized, a symbol from his dreams. Inside, the folder contained a story about the forest, known for its ancient powers. Spirits were believed to gather there, and the forest itself could distort reality, trapping those who ventured too far. The more Ethan uncovered, the more drawn he felt to the forest. His dreams became more vivid, and he began to see strange figures in the shadows. The lines between reality and nightmare blurred. He could no longer trust his senses. Was the hospital a place of healing, or had it become a prison? Was the forest connected to the strange events, or was it merely a backdrop to something sinister? As Ethan grew more obsessed, the atmosphere became heavier. The staff, once polite, now seemed strange, their eyes hollow. They moved like shadows, no longer fully human. The hospital itself seemed alive, its walls shifting, its floors groaning. Ethan's mind slipped, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being pulled into something darker. One evening, he found himself standing in the forest, surrounded by unnatural fog. The trees seemed to whisper, their voices indistinguishable from the wind. He reached out, his fingers brushing against the bark, but just as he made contact, everything went black. The next day, the hospital was quiet. Ethan was gone, and no one knew where he disappeared to. His room was left undisturbed. The hospital continued as usual, though rumors of Ethan's disappearance spread through the town. Some said he was swallowed by the forest, lost to its negative energies. Others claimed he vanished into thin air, as many others had before. The mystery of the hospital and the forest remained unsolved. The staff continued their work, but the atmosphere remained thick with an unseen presence. The forest, even more foreboding, seemed to wait, as if anticipating the next soul to enter. The truth of what happened to Ethan, and to the others who disappeared, was buried deep within the shadows, hidden from those who might uncover it. The hospital still stands, and though many have heard the rumors, few are willing to seek answers. The forest remains dark and mysterious, and the question lingers. What happened to Ethan, and who, if anyone, will return from the hospital at the edge of the cursed woods? Emma sat in her car, staring at the towering, dilapidated structure that loomed in front of her. The old hospital had been abandoned for years, its faded walls telling a story no one had bothered to write down. She'd heard the rumors, strange disappearances, unsettling stories about the doctors, whispers of crimes that had never been investigated, but she never imagined that they might be true. As an investigative reporter, Emma thrived on uncovering secrets, but this felt different. The air was thick with an eerie stillness, as if the building itself was holding its breath, waiting for her to make the first move. She had to get to the bottom of it. The story was too big to ignore. Inside, the hospital was a labyrinth of decaying corridors and abandoned rooms. Once bustling with the energy of patients and staff, it now stood frozen in time. The faint smell of mildew lingered in the air, mingling with the scent of stale dust. Emma's footsteps echoed in the silence, her heart pounding in her chest as she moved deeper into the forgotten building. The first clue came when she found an old patient file. It was buried beneath a pile of dust-covered papers, tucked away in a rusted metal drawer. The name on the file was familiar: John Harrington, a former surgeon at the hospital. But what caught Emma's attention wasn't the name, it was the date. Harrington had disappeared without a trace over 2 decades ago, along with several others. The case was never solved. Emma couldn't stop there. She needed to know more. She scoured through old records, speaking with former employees who had worked in the hospital before it closed. One former nurse, visibly shaken, told Emma that she had seen things that couldn't be explained. Patients who vanished, never to be found again. Staff who suddenly quit, their faces pale with fear. The hospital had been a place of secrets, she said, and no one dared to ask too many questions. The deeper Emma dug, the more unsettling it became. Every time she thought she was on the verge of uncovering the truth, another door would close, files would go missing, important documents were suddenly gone. It was as if the hospital itself was working against her. Late one night, as Emma explored the lower floors, she noticed something strange. The dim light flickered, casting long shadows along the hallway. She heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps behind her, echoing through the empty space. When she turned, no one was there. Her heart raced as she quickened her pace, the unsettling feeling of being watched gnawing at her. She stumbled upon an old storage room, and inside found something that took her breath away: a set of old, incomplete medical records. The names of patients who had vanished were listed, all under the same doctor's care: John Harrington. It was then that Emma realized the truth. Harrington wasn't just a doctor, he had been a part of something far darker. There had been crimes committed in this very hospital, hidden under the guise of medical procedures. The patients who had disappeared hadn't simply walked away. They were taken, and the man behind it all had never been caught. But as Emma pieced together the chilling puzzle, things began to spiral out of control. She was no longer alone in the hospital. The shadows seemed to follow her, and every creak of the building felt like a warning. Someone, or something, was watching her. In her final attempt to expose the truth, Emma found one last piece of the puzzle: a document buried in an old office, outlining Harrington's involvement in a criminal syndicate that operated through the hospital. The document contained names, dates, and disturbing details about the disappearances. She was moments away from revealing it to the authorities. But when she turned to grab the document, it was gone. Panic gripped her chest. The file had vanished, as if swallowed by the building itself. She searched the room frantically, but it was nowhere to be found. The hospital had claimed its final secret, and Emma was left with nothing but unanswered questions. Had the criminal syndicate really been shut down, or had they simply moved on, leaving the hospital's ghosts to linger? Standing outside the crumbling structure, Emma realized that the truth would never come to light. The mystery was too deep, too well hidden. The hospital, its crimes, and the people involved would remain buried in the past, forgotten by all but a few. And as she turned to leave, a chill ran down her spine. She wasn't sure if it was the cold wind or the lingering feeling that someone, something was still watching her. The mystery of the forgotten hospital would remain unsolved. It was a quiet night at the city hospital, an eerie stillness hanging in the air. The building was known for its sterile halls and high-tech equipment, yet something about the atmosphere tonight felt different, almost suffocating. The hospital had a reputation for dealing with difficult cases, but what happened tonight was something that no one could have predicted. A small boy, no older than 12, had been admitted earlier that evening. His name was Arjun. He had been brought in by his mother, who appeared panicked, explaining that Arjun had been acting strangely all day. The doctors were unsure of what had happened, as there were no apparent signs of injury or illness. Arjun's mother, who had been frantic since the moment she arrived, sat in the waiting room, her hands trembling. She kept glancing at the clock, growing more anxious with each passing minute. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, something more sinister than a mere illness. Inside the hospital room, Arjun lay motionless on the bed. His eyes were open, staring at the ceiling, yet his gaze seemed unfocused, as if lost in a trance. The nurse, Maria, tried to comfort him, but he wouldn't respond. His silence made her uneasy. She felt a strange chill as she looked at the boy. There was a presence in the room, something unexplainable. As the hours passed, the hospital began to feel colder. The lights flickered, casting unsettling shadows across the walls. Maria decided to call in Dr. Raghav, the head of the department, to examine the boy more closely. He arrived quickly, a seasoned professional who had dealt with hundreds of cases over the years. But even he couldn't ignore the sense of dread that had filled the room. "His vitals are normal," Dr. Raghav muttered, his brow furrowed as he reviewed the readings. "There's nothing physically wrong with him, he's just staring." Maria turned to the boy, noticing something strange. His eyes, once wide and terrified, had narrowed, and his expression seemed almost knowing. "Something's not right, Doctor," Raghav whispered, feeling an inexplicable unease creeping up his spine. That was when the power went out. The entire hospital was plunged into darkness, save for the emergency lights that flickered weakly overhead. The silence was deafening. Maria tried to reach for her phone to call for backup, but the signal was gone. Then the lights snapped back on, and everything seemed normal once again. But as Maria turned back to Arjun, her heart stopped. He was gone. The bed was empty, the sheets were undisturbed, but there was no sign of the boy anywhere in the room. Maria rushed to the door, but it was locked from the inside. There was no way Arjun could have escaped on his own. Panic set in. The security cameras, however, showed no trace of the boy leaving the room, no signs of a struggle, no movement at all. An hour later, the police arrived. They scoured the hospital, searching every corner, every hallway, every room. But there was no trace of Arjun. His mother was in hysterics, demanding to know where her son had gone. The authorities could find no evidence, no clues, nothing to explain his sudden disappearance. Days passed, and the investigation continued, but the mystery remained unsolved. Arjun was never found, and the hospital became the subject of rumors. Some said it was a simple case of a boy running away in the middle of the night, but others whispered that something far more disturbing had taken place. The case remained open, but no one could ever figure out what happened that night. Weeks later, to everyone's shock, Arjun returned home. He walked through the front door one evening looking as though nothing had happened, as if he had never been missing. His mother, overwhelmed with relief, rushed to hug him, but there was something unsettling about his silence. He refused to speak about where he had been, what had happened to him, or how he had returned. It was as if the events that had transpired were locked away, buried in a part of him that he would never share. Despite all the efforts to understand, Arjun's disappearance remained a mystery, an enigma that no one could solve. And so the question lingered. What happened to Arjun that night in the hospital? To this day, no one knows.